Hello, my name is Aletta Bartel, and this is my part 6 of my teacher candidate work sample. So an overall summary, I was teaching at Pontiac High School in North Scituate, Rhode Island. I was teaching grades 9th and 10th, a unit on relationship violence, and there were 4 lessons within the unit. So why relationship violence? Relationship violence is very important to teach to the high school, especially at the 9th and 10th grade level, where they are just starting to get into relationships and choose to be in them, whether they're friendships, romantic relationships. So this unit would give them the skills and the knowledge to choose to want to be in healthy relationships and avoid those abusive ones. And in 2007, there was the Lindsay and Burke Act, which required all Rhode Island school districts to create a policy in responding to dating violence. So this made sure the schools were educating their staff and their students and giving that health curriculum a factor on relationship violence. It gave them the definition of dating violence, what warning signs are, and characteristics of healthy relationships. And within this unit, we touched on all of these aspects of relationship violence, plus more. So for my goals and objectives, I had a total of 5 objectives for this unit. So objective 1, we had cognitive comprehension level, and I had at least 80% of the class will differentiate characteristics of healthy and unhealthy relationships. So I had to at least standard for each of these objectives, which was graded on an infographic by a rubric. So then going to objective 2, we have going into the cognitive analyzing stage. We have at least 80% of the class will identify the warning signs of abuse to at least standard on the infographic. Then going to objective 3, we have the cognitive understanding level. At least 80% of the class will describe the 4 components of the cycle of abuse to at least standard. Going into objective 4, we go into the affective valuing domain and level. At least 80% of the class will use I statements to advocate about their role and their individual responsibility in developing health relationships to at least standard, once again. And then lastly, we have objective 5, which goes back to cognitive, but an application level. And at least 80% of the class will provide effective strategies for helping stand up for themselves in an unhealthy relationship using assertiveness to at least standard. So going to how I assessed the students. First of all, we have the pre-unit assessment using a Google form. This addressed all objectives 1 through 5. And this was given before lesson 1. So the students, I was able to see the students' knowledge on relationship violence prior to implementing the unit, which was great. The pre-unit assessment allowed a variety of question types. And if it was needed, they were able to have a little bit more time as well. Going into lesson plan 1, I used a Google form addressing objectives 1 and 2. This would allow the students to demonstrate their knowledge of healthy and unhealthy relationships, incorporates technology. Also, they were able to show me their knowledge about warning signs as well. Going into lesson plan 2, we have the Quizlet Live, which addressed objective number 3. So again, students would be using technology. And then we're just talking about this cycle of abuse. That was objective number 3, talking about that cycle of abuse. And then for lesson plan 3, I went back to the Google form. I found the Google form was an easy way to get data and students' authentic answers right away and right off the bat. So for this last Google form, I was able to address those last unit objectives of 4 and 5, where they were able to analyze and then apply the information. And lastly, I had the post-unit assessment, which was the performance assessment. I had the students create an infographic, which again addressed all objectives 1 through 5. So they were able to demonstrate the knowledge of healthy versus unhealthy relationships, warning signs, the cycle of abuse, using I statements and using assertiveness. So overall, this is my part 4 block plan. So my overall unit goal was the students would achieve knowledge, skills, and attitude to develop healthy relationships and avoid abusive ones. So starting off with lesson 1 was about addressing those first 2 objectives about healthy versus unhealthy relationships and warning signs. So I started off with a Jamboard activity to really promote that safe space. So I had each student write 3 characteristics about themselves on a sticky note and place it on the Jamboard. And then I had students try to guess which students that was. And of course, the students had a hard time guessing who it was. And then this showed the students that you never know what the person next to you is doing, thinking, you don't know what they've ever gone through. So it's important to be respectful to one another and to respect everyone's ideas. This made a ground rule that this was a safe space. And I wanted people to feel comfortable in this lesson because it's definitely not an easy topic to talk about. So I wanted everyone to feel in that safe space. Then we went into a healthy versus unhealthy relationships Padlet, where I had them compare and contrast the different characteristics. I had a PowerPoint with a whole class discussion about warning signs, what they were, and examples of them as well. I had them analyze a video clip at the end of class to show what the warning signs were in that video and if they were healthy or unhealthy. And then for that form assessment, we had the Google form. Moving into lesson 2, we talked about the cycle of abuse, and I also decided to include why people stay in these unhealthy relationships as well. So then we used a Kahoot to review the material from the previous class. It was a great way to kick off the class. The students were excited and it was great. Then we went into a PowerPoint to review those ground rules, make sure we had a safe space going forward. And I did that every day, which I found was very helpful. And then I did a Google Slides presentation, but incorporated Peer Deck. So then the students had the PowerPoint to watch and go through as I did it with them. And then they were also required to answer questions every now and then as well. So it really kept them engaged and on top of their feet and thinking. And then we had a group discussion about the cycle of abuse as well. And then I brought in video clips again, and I had them analyze the cycle of abuse and where each component was present. And I also had them do scenario reviews as well. So we read out a scenario in the class, and they had to pinpoint exactly where the cycle of abuse was in each story. And again, this was assessed by a Quizlet Live. I found that Quizlet Live wasn't the best way to assess the students because of my account. If I had upgraded to the teacher account, which I did not realize when I administered the assessment, then I would have been able to see the data from the students and how they were progressing, what questions they constantly got wrong. But due to the fact that I did not have a teacher account, I wasn't able to find that data. So unfortunately, I had to go on the class experience, what I saw right there firsthand, to validate moving on, that they knew what the cycle of abuse was, why people stayed, because Quizlet Live just didn't give me that tangible data to really show that they met their target. But then moving on for lesson 3, we were using I statements and how to use assertiveness. So I started off with a piecing it back together activity where they had to write down the list of values or non-negotiables that they feel is important in a healthy relationship. And I read scenarios one by one where it could be a possibility, a scenario in their life where they would rip up their value, crumple it to a ball and throw it on the ground or put it on their desk. And then at the end, I had them uncrumple those pieces of paper and try to put it back in together in that sheet of paper. Of course, they weren't able to. And I compared that to how they were supposed to, once you put all these values aside, you have nothing left to base off your healthy relationship off of. And then we went into analyzing the Love the Way You Lie song as well. So we were able to pinpoint those characteristics of unhealthy and healthy relationships, warning signs, the cycle of abuse, and that really brought the story of relationship violence to life. It became real for them. We also read the Lindsay and Burke story, which also became real because this is a girl from Rhode Island, grew up just like they would, and then she fell victim to relationship violence because she wasn't able to be assertive and stood up for herself. And then we went into a guided discussion with a PowerPoint, really focusing on how they could use assertiveness and what I statements are useful. And again, that was assessed by using a Google form as well. And lastly, for the lesson plan 4, we had the performance assessment where the students were able to make their infographics. So this is an example of the questions on the pretest. So for objective 1, I realized going back now that they really didn't line up exactly how they should. So these are the questions I had. I had list 3 types of relationship abuse and at least 2 sentences explain 2 reasons why I think people might stay in an unhealthy relationship. Whereas I think I should have had them compare healthy versus unhealthy relationships using a scenario right off the bat. Going into objective 2, I asked them to, in at least 2 sentences, explain what warning signs of abuse are and give at least 2 examples of what they would look like. Objective 3, I had them state and explain the 4 components of the cycle of abuse, which many students did not know of, especially during the pretest. Objective 4, using I statements, I had them on a scale rate that when you decide that you're ready to be in a relationship, how important it will be to be in a healthy relationship. So that really touches on the affective domain. And then objective 5, assertiveness to advocate for themselves. List at least 2 strategies you can use to help someone you may think be in an unhealthy relationship or friendship, which again, looking back at this, it should be more about themselves rather than looking at other relationships as well. And then lastly, in at least 2 sentences, explain 2 ways you can make sure you are in a healthy relationship. So this is an example of my formative assessment from lesson plan 1. These are the directions. I had them analyze the scenarios, pick out the characteristics of healthy or unhealthy relationships, and then I had them determine if it was healthy or unhealthy, and I had them explain why. Going to lesson plan 2 was the Quizlet Live. So again, if I was able to upgrade to that teacher account, I would have been able to get that data from the individual students, see what questions they were having trouble with, where they succeeded, and then it would have been more tangible data. But unfortunately, since I didn't have that, I wasn't able to see the data. Therefore, it was an ineffective formative assessment for this unit. If I was to reteach it, I would make sure I would upgrade that teacher account and make sure I have that tangible data to move on and verify that I can move on. Going into lesson plan 3, I used a Google form again, and I had them to 1, check off the different kinds of I statements because we were working on I statements and assertiveness. And then I had them use how they would use I statements in a scenario, and that's how they would use the assertiveness. So this is what the performance assessment looked like. This is a description of what I had them do in the infographic. So I had them, they were able to use the PowerPoints from class, the Lindsay and Burke Foundation, and the Love is Respect website as resources to gather all their information. And then I had them use Canva to create their infographic. And then I had them do a few different criteria which aligned with each objective. So I had them create a section comparing healthy and unhealthy relationships, a section explaining what warning signs of an unhealthy relationship are, a section identifying and explaining which each component of the cycle of abuse was, a section explaining 3 ways you can use assertive communication and 1 reason why it's important. And lastly, I had them create a section with at least 3 I statements used in a healthy relationship and why they're helpful. So this is an example of one of the students that met standard on each one of them. Well, at least met standard. As you can see, he had 4 or more characteristics of the healthy versus healthy relationships. He had an accurate description of what warning signs are with examples included. He correctly identified and stated each of the components of the cycle of abuse, was able to show why assertiveness is important and give examples of I statements. So this is a great example of what I wanted the infographic to look like. And the rubric went great along with this particular infographic. Moving on to this infographic, this is where I realized where